right. So now you have an audience of 2.
Wonderful. I had an audience of 2 last week, or 3. But they were like partly the people that were volunteering. No, I had really 1. I had
You
Lynn.
did?
I had Lynn Sonner.
Oh,
And then I had the 2 people at
what talk was that?
the
I didn't.
that skinny, dark-haired Jewish girl and
No, but
her
what
boyfriend Larry and their
talk?
volunteers.
Yeah.
Larry
What
and
was the talk about?
it was about St. Augustine.
I know, Al mentioned it, and I didn't even know about it, or I don't know what happened.
That's because I slipped these in like this.
I would have liked
I
to.
don't. I mean.
So is that taped already, St.
Yeah,
Augustine?
yeah,
So
but it's not on Robin's site. But
Oh.
I'll send you the link,
Ah, okay,
and then you can see it.
okay.
But this is the continuation of it.
Oh, great.
So I'm not going to go back over it, but
No, yeah,
it's
yeah.
on the web.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we're videoing, and everything should be good.
So you have your own channel, Chris? On?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, then I find it. I don't
No,
know
it's harder to find than Robin's. You find
Ah,
Robin's
it's
before me,
okay.
but I'll send you the
I find
link
things-
about Augustine.
I find
So
it.
now, okay, so, and what's your name?
Keith.
Keith.
He's
Keith.
Jonathan Burroughs' brother.
Far out.
Yeah, far out.
Well, I've known him a long time.
Have you?
Yeah, so Keith and Jonathan. How come you have like an accent and he doesn't have an accent?
Yeah.
That's because I came from Alabama.
Yeah, you have an
Alabama
English accent.
You're
You-
Alabama
You
bound.
sound like you're from London or something. Okay, I don't know. So I'll leave all this in the talk. This will make it, it'll spice it up. Okay, so Jay Baba, and here we are. It's 12, and I'm going to start this talk. And this is kind of a series of talks that I'm doing because it makes it's easier to just, I'm writing a book, and I don't have time to write all the little papers that I would like to write that I think about when I write. And I'm afraid I'll never write them down, and so I can just say them. And even if I get it wrong, it's okay. I got the main general idea across, because they're kind of like those wispy thoughts you have when you're writing. You know what I mean? And when I talk too, and then I watch the talk, I get much better how I should have said it. You see?
Using it as a tool.
Yes, it is a tool. So I'm using, so you're really helping me. I'm not helping you, you're helping me. So you're my teacher. And maybe we'll help each other if you hear something that you like or you think might be true. Okay, so I'm titling this, The Location, and that's in quotes, okay? So it's, you get it, The Location of Spirit, Historical Trends in Conceptualizing God. And I could have said, in the newsletter, it says the location of God. It's all the same. Whether we're talking about the soul, God, or both of them are considered usually in the West as spirit. And I think they have that word spirit even in German.
Yeah, Geist.
Right, guys. Right, and you say it's not
No,
the
but
same,
mind,
but
mind
it's
was the problem.
right. But I don't like that word mind anyway. I avoid that word a lot. Yeah. So that's good. The talk by Chris Hahn. There we are. And this talk is a continuation of the last one I gave about 2 weeks ago on St. Augustine, where we talked about his philosophical, St. Augustine was one of Baba's favorite Christian saints, and most Baba lovers don't know much about St. Augustine, but especially they wouldn't know about his philosophical background, because he was a genuine philosopher and is highly regarded even amongst atheists. So anyway, now we're continuing that because we left off where he had a profound conversion and change in his understanding, and we're going to talk about that again. But that previous talk is online, and anybody who wants it, I'll send them a link. Okay. All right. The first thing I want to say is it's easy for us to make fun of people who point to where God is and they go, oh, God's on a cloud or something like that. And it's easy to ridicule. Or a person who thinks their soul is like a thing inside of their solar plexus or something like that. But I like to look at, well, how did those ideas come about in people? Because it's usually very understandable. There usually is a good solid reason that people think these things, and so it's kind of shallow to just ridicule ideas that are a little more primitive than your own. You should see how it evolved. And that in a sense, and I think we all need to sort of go through these steps. We kind of go through, we start with a simple kind of primitive understanding of something, and then we graduate up when we're ready. And that's, even Baba would kind of implies that religion is like that. It's for those who need that. Mm-hmm. And you've said that, you understand that. So consider the fact, to begin with, going back into the ancient past, and we know this. We see signs of it in the first time that people began writing. They began writing about something other than their physical body. They wrote about their inner part, their inward part. And they didn't have the word soul yet. This is before the Greeks. This is sort of, no, well, it's earlier. It's like the time of Homer and the time of the gospel, the books of Moses. So 800 years before the Greeks, they didn't have words like soul, which comes from psyche, which is Greek. Well, that's later. That's a later development. So they just referred to some inner part, and it's not hard to imagine. I mean, I have experienced it. When I get really mad, sometimes I feel something up here in my head, like it's going to explode. And when I feel my heart hurts, somebody hurt my feelings, I often will feel it right here in my chest, these emotions. And then lower emotions like gut anger, like I really want to get revenge, I'll feel it right in my gut. So you actually do have sensations, and it could easily feel that, oh, well, that these emotions have a location, or they're emanating from something. And in fact, Plato, who came later, he and I'm assuming he speculated like that. He believed we had three souls, one in the abdomen, one in the chest, and one in the head. And they were, and the one that when you died, it got out and it went to heaven, that was the one up here, because he was all into reason. And understandably, he was a philosopher. And he had that and this kind of goes with Eastern, New Age stuff of the solar plexus and those parts. But I'm not concerned with that here. We're talking about something else. So there may even be some truth to these locations. Maybe there are energies or something. Chakras, yeah. Or what do the Chinese call the energy? Qi. Yes, maybe. But that's not the subject we're talking about, because we're talking about God. Okay, so I gave a couple quotes from the Bible, both from the Old Testament and the New Testament, referring to simply an inward part. Okay. Now I'm going to sort of change subjects and take it to a higher level. The thing of location, the source of that kind of thinking, looking for a location. There's my soul. There's God. There's that. And this has to do with the subject of causes. And causes would have been something that wasn't immediately important to primitive man, but soon would be, because if you could know the cause of it raining, like some God making it rain, then you might be able to be in community, have a good relationship with that God and maybe get, increase your chances of a good outcome of it raining. So thinking about causes was a way to try to get some control of the world, probably, well, undoubtedly, ancient times. And originally, they had animal spirits and things like that that they attributed things to as their cause. But I want to talk about the naturalness of seeking causes by looking around us for them. And this will also relate to why we think of God or the soul or spirit as like it's someplace. There's a joke I saw when I was a kid, and it was a stand-up comedian, and he told this joke that he said, "You ever seen people and they're walking along and they come on?" I'm going to turn this camera so I can make sure I'm not out of camera. Okay, they're walking along here, and they trip. You know, and then he says, "And you ever notice that they look back to see what it was?" And the audience laughed. And at the time I was a teenager, and I didn't really get it as profound, but it was kind of profound because the person, when he trips, it's not his impulse to look within himself and wonder if he's a klutz.
Yeah.
He wants to see, also he's doing it in case somebody saw him trip.
Yeah.
So he trips and he looks back, like as if there's a rut in the road. So that's just a normal impulse. And this is how people first began to think about causes, even in the beginnings of Greek philosophy. They began to look around them around 600 BC. Thales, the first philosopher like that, natural philosopher, he looked at magnets and he noticed that they attracted things, and he thought maybe something like that was controlling the movement of our body and the movements of the world. And so he speculated the existence of psyche, which is the first instance of the word that becomes soul. So it's literally, when we're looking for what caused that, well, we look around. Okay. Now, let's talk about the cause of something especially important, which is life. And you brought up life one time and said, "What's life?" And I said, well, the Greeks mostly associated it with motion. But that was just one of the attributes. Life was what was for the ancients that first thought about it. And they wondered about it because they were seeing a lot of people die, especially on the battlefield. Because the Greeks were always fighting, and they loved to fight, and they saw a lot of death very close up. And it would have made them contemplative about what is occurring with death. Now, you can notice with death, there's certain things that are occurring, certain powers that seem to be, that we seem to have, a person, that leave at the moment of death. One of them is motion, the power to move, the power to think, the awareness, but also the power that causes your body to continue to have integrity and hold together and not just fall apart. Because the moment you pass that threshold of death, the body literally starts to fall apart and decay. So something was making it, holding it together, like, and what was that? So these were the aspects of life that they saw checked out. And so that, that's about the best they could do to say what had left had obviously taken those things with it. And what happens, the last thing a person does when you watch them die, and I've never watched somebody die, but we use the word, he expired at 5 o'clock. He exhales one last time. And and with that, the breath leaves. So the notion that those powers were in the breath was kind of made sense. It was in the breath. And then what happens to breath? Now the Greeks were very smart, and they knew about things like billows and hot air and various basic laws of nature that they hadn't quantified with number, but they knew about them. And they knew that hot air rises. And the breath is warm. Oh, that's another thing that leaves the body, heat. The body gets cold.
Right.
And breath is got heat. There's a lot of things they had to think about. So anyway, so because warm air rises, where did this breath go? Well, it went
To the ether.
somewhere
Yeah.
where all this breath is going, and this became heaven. Okay, it became, to the Greeks, it wasn't heaven like in Christianity, but it was a layer around the earth that was made of, like, it was like an ether, and it was made out of, like, kind of like a spiritual stuff, and the gods were in there. And
You know, by the way, if I
Yes.
can just say that, I heard lately, or from several people, I think, that when you expire, you inhale again, but that's it. So it's not the expiration, apparently.
I didn't
So
know
you
that.
want to look
Well, like I
into
said,
that
I never
maybe.
saw
You know
it.
that you-
I hope I never see it.
That you-
It sounds kind of
Yeah, that's what I heard.
traumatizing. So I have the quote from Genesis of how God breathed life. It rises, and so I show this, and we have the idea of heaven. And let me see if I have this. I'm jumping forward. Oh, Plato had the idea that this is called a painting called The Fall, and you have the fall in Christianity. And but before there was Christianity, there was Plato, and Plato believed that not only did the soul from up here go up into that sphere, but we originally had a fall in some
Yeah.
spiritual sense from that place where the gods are. And we once saw the forms, and that's why we recognize circles and squares and things in geometry. It's kind of strange. It's kind of important. So, this one, the breath rises. This rising inspires images of some place it goes. Now, but where does this breath of life come from? So if it goes, how did we get it
Right.
to begin with? And so we get, very obviously, the idea of God breathing into the mouth of Adam. And he breathes into him the life. Let's see. I'll have the quote. Well, I can't find the quote. Okay. No, I want to find it. Here it is.
Yeah.
And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Other versions, that's King James, other versions say it a little different, but I just don't need to be getting into that. So, now, and so on, and all these metaphors we conjure up as causes get imagined as real things. So everything imagined, like the physical things we see, everything these things are all imagined, these causes are imagined like the things we see when we look around us. And that was the point of the story of the guy who trips and looks around for the cause. Because later when he starts thinking metaphysically, he's still thinking like a thing. A cause ought to be a thing. It's just the original instinct. I mean, even an animal would like do that. Like if you tickled, its tail, it would probably spin around and try and snap it.
What is it?
Yeah,
An
what just
outside force. Really.
right, an outside force. It's not going to look for.
Yeah.
I wonder if I have phantom limb disorder. I wonder if I'm, or something. Yeah, he looks for it. So we have that instinct. Now, eventually, it all comes together. Spirit is this breath. It rises, and we look up, and that's where spirit is. It's pretty simple. And so that's where we get that. Now, we're going to get even more sophisticated now. Because now we get to Athens in the 4th century BC, and they're getting really smart, and they're really thinking of more complex issues regarding these subjects. Now, I went over this in an earlier talk, and I'm not going to do it again, the reasons for Plato giving this analogy, but it's complicated, so I'm not going to redo it. I'm just going to go over the analogy because it's about location of God, okay? Now, in this picture here, I always love this, that Plato, who's the older teacher of Aristotle, this is the painting by Raphael called The Philosophers. Plato's pointing up, and he means the transcendental. But he doesn't really mean the sky, he means the transcendental. And Aristotle's it's kind of a great gesture, because it's sort of like, yeah, get your feet on the ground. Yeah. And he was into, he invented logic, Aristotle did. Plato thought differently. He thought in these metaphors. And then back to, he taught using, he made up myths to explain this idea. Like the fall, that's a myth by Plato. It's very different than Aristotle. Aristotle would never do that. Aristotle wants to tell you the way it really is. But anyway, Plato gives us an analogy that has to do with the self. It's not like a place or anything. He understands that he's talking about layers of reality. Now, these are these prisoners, and they're chained up to face the back wall of a cave. And they're chained from birth, so they don't know that the shadows that they're seeing on the back wall of the cave are caused by things behind them in a fire. And so they live their entire life thinking that is the world. And Plato said, that's us. He said, the things that we're seeing with our eyes and our ears and everything is a shadow of reality, but it's not real. It's not the real reality. It's a shadow of these forms which are being carried so mischievously along this roadway behind the prisoners, but even that's not the reality. Behind them is a fire. The real reality gets discovered when one of the prisoners is released and unchained and led up these stairs, up this way, sees all this, sees what had been going on, and goes outside and sees the sun and the real world. And that is called Platonism, for Plato. Okay? Now those are degrees of reality, and I won't go over them, but he does. And it has a whole system. But that's enough for us to see that. So ordinary perceptions of the world, or physical or gross experience, is the most false or illusory. The only thing more illusory would just be your own imagination making things up. All right. Now, I want you to notice, and this doesn't have, is that in this metaphor, it's called sometimes called an allegory, the allegory of the cave. Where is the reality? Just because the name of this talk is the location of God, and that's sort of ironically said. It's out. Okay? It's not like we often think when we sit down to meditate, we're going to go within, right? We talk like that these days. And I'm not saying he thinks it's outside of your body or something. It's just that the metaphor is like that. In the metaphor, the false is in and the truth is outside. Go outside and you'll see the truth.
Yeah.
But only in the metaphor. But I wanted to show that that's the fall. Doesn't matter here. What I want to show as we go on is that it keeps changing where it is. It doesn't matter where it is. Actually, I'm going to jump forward. This is a philosopher. He was a student of Plato, called a Platonist or Neoplatonist, who followed the teachings of Plato, but he lived hundreds of years after him. And he's very important philosopher, we'll find out, regarding Christianity. His name was Plotinus. Now, and he lived in Egypt when it was part of the Roman Empire around the early 3rd century, late 3rd century. And he continued with the metaphor of the cave, and it changed in Plotinus. And he created what came to be what's called emanationism. And again, this is about spirit and the soul and reality. And here, the center that we have is concentric circles. In the center, you have that sun that was outside the cave. So before it was outside, now it's on the inside. And then and he's not talking about, this isn't supposed to be located anywhere, it's a chart to explain the degrees of reality. And as, this is like a sun, which is the one, which is like Baba's beyond God. This is God in the most, without any divisions, okay? That appears over and over in philosophy, in the East and West, the one. And then, like the sun, it has rays that go out, and those are called emanations. And as they go out, they become weaker and less real. And then you have mind and soul and all this stuff. And then at the out, this is matter. So again, this is the material world, and it's the least real. And there's none after that. So, the point of jumping to this was to show that the metaphor completely went inside out. What was out is now in. What was in is now out. Because that's not what these people meant. They were trying to convey the fact that there's these degrees of reality. But I want to talk about how we can understand these today better than they could describe at that time because of reasons I'll get to. Well, at the time of Plato, let's say at the time of Plotinus, around 250 AD, there's no such thing as psychology, right? They don't have a word, consciousness, or anything, okay? So there were other things that didn't exist, like they didn't have the concept of processes being causes, like evolution or plate tectonics. If you don't know about that, don't worry about it. But today we have various instruments of thinking they didn't have. So they had to describe these the best way that they could because they experienced these things in meditation within themselves. They actually experienced this. It wasn't just done like Aristotle using logic or something. They actually had visions, especially Plotinus. He was a real mystic. But they expressed them these ways. So what we're getting is metaphors. And it's very easy for people who, without those being able to explain what they're referring to, these just seem sort of obscure to us, these metaphors. Now I'm going to go back. Let's see, there we are. Okay, and I'll talk about St. Augustine. I'm going to go over a little of what I said last week. And it'll make more sense why I was just talking about Plotinus. So Baba says in Lord Maher, my two favorite women saints are St. Teresa of Avila and Catherine of Siena. My two favorite men, Francis of Assisi and St. Augustine. Now, I only say that as a plug for St. Augustine. And it makes you ponder why. Why was he naming Augustine? And when we study Augustine with understanding, we start to see why. Augustine lived early in the Christianity. He lived in right about the time of the fall of the Roman Empire in Hippo, which was part of Algeria, and it's in Africa, but it's very close to Italy. And he was born to a Christian mother, but he was a pagan, and his father was a pagan, and his father was a big gambler and a big drinker. And Augustine wrote, luckily, the first autobiography in history, Confessions.
Yeah.
And it tells the story of his conversion and the spiritual experience that he had that caused it. Because what was happening is that he was one of the most brilliant men in the Roman Empire in his lifetime. It was, he was a rhetor, somebody who argues, is paid to create arguments.
Mm-hmm.
But he does so cynically, like a lawyer. He's not looking for truth. And his mother, and he was a playboy, but not so much I mean, when he was going to college, he was going from girl to girl, but then he started living with this woman who started out, I think it's his maid, and or servant, and that was really upset his Christian mother because he should get married. It was very modern. It's a very modern story, and he felt a lot of guilt about it. And then she got pregnant, and then she left. She finally left him with the child, and he raised him. And the boy died at 16. But Augustine tried to do the best he could, but he knew he had this woman thing. He's famous for the line, "God grant me chastity, but not yet." And anyway, he had he was in a religion called Manichaeanism, which I talked about in the other talk, and he met the head of the Manichaeans, and he was very disillusioned with this Gnostic cult called Manichaeanism that he had been in. It's kind of a philosopher's religion, but when he found out how little that like his questions they couldn't answer, and he couldn't find answers for them, he was disillusioned, and then he considered again Christianity. And at that moment, like you said, when I arrived, you said, well, when the student's ready, the teacher shows up. Well, this is what happened to Augustine. Right about that point, another saint showed up in his life, who was Saint Ambrose, and he went to Ambrose for consultation and told him about his struggle and his consideration of becoming Christian. But what he said was that for him, Christianity didn't make any sense to him. He tried to read the Bible, and it just didn't make any sense. The New Testament made no sense to him. And they had no philosophy in Christianity yet, okay? It would come from Augustine. He is the philosopher that created Christian philosophy. So Ambrose said to Augustine, he said, okay, well, I understand. Because Ambrose was a brilliant man too, and he could see what Augustine was dealing with, and he said, I'll tell you what, I want to give you a book, and I want you to read it. And he hands him this book. This is Augustine, actually. He hands him this book, like Plotinus, the Platonist with the emanations, okay?
Oh, I see.
And he's a pagan.
Uh-huh.
See, he believes in gods and things. He's from Roman pagan philosopher, and Augustine. See, this is the symbolism of here. He's sort of torn between the church and Plotinus. He says, but he's a pagan, and Ambrose said, don't worry about it. He said, read it. And he said, these pagans can be very smart. And so the writings of Plato were not around anymore. It was interesting. In the Christian world, they were disappearing. So he basically only knew Plato through Plotinus. And he didn't know anything about Aristotle or anything like that. Anyway, Plotinus he read. Now,
what is this text?
okay, I may read some of it. So we're doing good for time, and this seems a little tedious, but I want to read some of this because this reading would cause in him his conversion.
Right.
And then he understood that Christ was the one in the center of the circles. And that the one, or the Logos, took birth so that we could see him, relate to him, and you don't have to be a philosopher, and you could love him. And nobody could understand the Logos. So it really moved his heart at that when he realized that the Logos could take a birth. And he realized that those Gnostics, they were kind of know-it-alls, but they really just sort of, it was kind of empty, it was loveless. Yeah. It was just totally in the head. Right. And they didn't even know what they were talking about, because the reality, the one, is so without any attributes that there's nothing to even think about, okay? So this is what, I'm going to read some of his writing. This is from the Confessions, and there are many translations of his books because they're so important. This one I like. It's by Albert Outler. And, I want to read this because it has to do with location. Okay. And this really, now, all right. So this writing he's in that transition. It's between Neoplatonism, which is the writing of Plotinus. It's called Neoplatonism. It's like New Plato. So I'm just going to read. Dead now was that evil and shameful youth of mine, and I was passing into full manhood. As I increased in years, the worse was my vanity, for I could not conceive of any substance but the sort I could see with my own eyes. So he's having trouble believing in God. I no longer thought of thee, O God, by the analogy of a human body, because he had read Plotinus, you know. Ever since I inclined my ear to philosophy, I had avoided this error. So you get it. He was not seeing a man on a cloud, since he'd been a philosopher. But as he's saying, that as a child he'd had. Okay, that's what. And the truth on this point I rejoiced to find in the faith of our spiritual mother, thy Catholic Church. This doesn't mean Catholic Church that meaning today. This is the whole, there's only one monolithic church at the time. There wasn't different churches. Yet I could not see how else to conceive thee, other than a person. And I, a man, and such a man, sought to conceive thee, the sovereign and only true God. In my inmost heart I believe that thou art incorruptible and inviolable and unchangeable, because though I knew not how or why, I could still see plainly and without doubt that the corruptible is inferior to the incorruptible. This is an ancient idea. I'll explain it quickly. If you have a pot of gold, you can destroy the pot just with banging on it, but the gold's still there. So the pot was more corruptible than the gold. Yeah. So we have greater value to the gold than the pot. Okay. The inviolable, meaning incorruptible, obviously superior to its opposite, and the unchangeable better than the changeable. So this is just a principle he's used. It's very high philosophy. It's just, now my heart cried out violently against all phantasms. A phantasm is those pictures in your mind. And with this, even memories and things. And with this one clear certainty, I endeavored to brush away the swarm of unclean flies that swarmed around the eyes of my mind. But behold, they were scarcely scattered before they gathered again. He couldn't help but keep thinking about stuff, shit, the corruptible shit. Before they gathered again, buzzed against my face and beclouded my vision. I no longer thought of God in the analogy of a human body, yet I was constrained to conceive thee to be some kind of body in space, either infused into the world or infinitely diffused beyond the world. Now this is important because sometimes we go, well, God is sort of like like an ether or like oxygen, or it's sort of dispersed through things. But even he sees a mistake in this. And he shows it philosophically. Either infused into the world or infinitely diffused around the world, around the world like a bubble around the earth. And this was the incorruptible, inviolable, unchangeable substance, which I thought was better than the corruptible. So he's gone from God being a man to God being a substance that doesn't corrode, okay? But then, for whatever I conceive to be deprived of the dimensions of space, appeared to me to be nothing. Okay, so it has to be in space, because if he tries to picture something that's not in space, what does he get? Nothing at all. Nothing comes to mind. Yeah. Okay? And he's trying to picture God. Okay? For whatever I conceived to be deprived of the dimensions of space appeared to me to be nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even a void.
No.
For if a body is taken out of space, or if space is emptied of all its contents, of earth, water, air, or heaven, yet it remains an empty space, a spacious nothing, as it were. Being thus gross-hearted, that's interesting, Baba uses the gross plane, and he uses the term gross-hearted, at least in this translation from the Latin, and it was Latin. Being thus gross-hearted and not clear even to myself, I then held that whatever had neither length, nor breadth, nor density, nor solidity, and did not or could not receive such dimensions, was absolutely nothing. Yeah, it's interesting, because of Baba's books, the everything and the nothing. And what you see as nothing is the everything, and what you see as the everything is nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
For at that time my mind dwelt only the ideas, which resembled the forms with which my eyes are still familiar. So he's saying, things that resemble this, like the guy who stumbles and he turns around to look for something. He's still thinking like that. Nor could I see that the act of thought by which I formed those ideas was itself immaterial. That's a realization. He says, wait a minute, it's kind of like Descartes. Something is trying to see. You know, Bob, somebody says, you know, what is God? And he says, it's that which prompts you to ask the question.
Yeah.
So that's what he is realizing. And yet, and he's not doing this, he has so little to read. It's so brilliant it really is. And yet it could not have formed them if it were not itself a measurable entity. So also I thought about thee, O life of my life, as stretched out through infinite space, interpenetrating the whole mass of the world, reaching out beyond in all directions to immensity without end, so that the earth should have thee, the heaven have thee, all things have thee, and all of them be limited in thee, while thou art placed nowhere at all. So he's not any particular place, it's just everywhere. As the body of the air above the earth does not bar the passage of the light of the sun, so that the light penetrates it, not by bursting nor dividing, but filling it entirely. So I imagined that the body of heaven and air and sea, and even of the earth, was all open to thee, and in all its greatest parts, as well as the smallest, was ready to receive thy presence by a secret inspiration, which from within, without all, orders all things thou hast created. This was my conjecture, because I was unable to think of anything else, yet it was untrue. For in this way, a great part of the earth would contain a greater part of thee. This is a really interesting argument. If it's this stuff that disperses everywhere, you know, Russia would have more of it than, Korea.
Well,
Okay. For in this way, a greater part of the earth would contain a greater part of thee, a smaller part, a smaller fraction of thee. All things would be full of thee in such a sense that there would be more of thee in an elephant than in a sparrow, because one is larger than the other and fills a larger space. And this would make the portions of thyself present in the several portions of the world in fragments, great to the great, small to the small. But thou art not such a one. But as yet, thou hadst not enlightened by darkness. So this is his. There's almost nothing like this. It's very infrequent. Bertrand Russell wrote a book called My Philosophical Development, where he does talk like this about his thinking, actually. But it's very rare when a great mind is telling you exactly the steps that the mistakes that they made, and then they see the mistake. That's all for that. But it's him grasping with the question, where is God? What is God? It's sort of part of the same thing. So getting beyond, feeling like anger in my solar plexus, and then thinking, looking for my soul there. This has come a long way from that. That's like the beginning, and this is where the spirit is becoming something else. Now, what happened because of his reading of Plotinus, and I will do my best to show this. The Neoplatonists. Now, Plotinus had disciples. He actually didn't even do most of his own writing. He had a disciple write what he said, like Socrates and Plato. But he had disciples, and they would kind of like live in an ashram, and they would meditate. And what they did is they'd sit down, and the process that they'd go through to get to the perception of the one was to pull away from these layers. So imagine you're sort of like looking from here out this way, and this is material things, so like all the stuff in the room, and then you pull your attention back from it. Don't squint your eyes and don't pay attention to the objects in the room. Then what's the next thing that suddenly comes into focus that wasn't in focus before? All that chatter in your head. Oh, I need to, make sure I get a, gallon of milk on the way home after this meditation. So you have to stop listening to that, because that's more real than this. For them, thought is more real than the physical. But it's still not anything like the reality. And then you then pull your attention in, and then what you focus on is incorruptible things. Now, incorruptible things, they sound sort of boring when I name them, but this is the tradition. Things like a circle, but a circle as a concept. The very circularity of a circle, circleness. Circleness, a circle, a round thing is viable, but circularity, you can describe that in geometry, and it's always perfect. It's perfect because it's conceptual. We're not talking about a thing that's shaped like a circle, but circularity itself. So these principles, okay, so another one is good. This is a form. So good, well, this would be the supreme good, but I'll do it anyway. Oh, this is good. That's good. We all can argue over what's good and what's not good. But what's mysterious is that we all seem to have the concept of the good.
Right.
I mean, there's something that we're calling these things,
Yeah.
and that feels incorruptible, and that you never saw anywhere. Nobody brought you some to your playpen and said, "Oh, honey, I'm bringing you the good for you to take a look at it." You just sort of seem to be born with the incorruptibles.
Yeah.
So by pulling the attention back in meditation, they actually focused on these kinds of things. And then there are higher forms that are incorruptible. Like the good is the highest form, but they're lesser, and the geometry is lesser. You get this? So the most corruptible is like, the most corruptible thing in the world is things like here. That's really, really corruptible. A little less corruptible is my thought, because, my worry that I gotta pick up the milk, because that doesn't seem to go away, and I can't seem to tear it up. But eventually it goes away, and etc. So I think you're getting that. You're getting the less viable, the more permanent. And so then you just speculate at the absolutely inviolable, absolutely incorruptible. That's the one. You never can see it.
Right.
That's why Christ takes birth eventually,
Right.
for Augustine.
Right.
Finally, he understands
Mm-hmm.
what Christianity is.
Right.
We are worshiping the one. In other words, Christianity was respectable, as philosophically respectable for him.
Yeah.
He found it in the language, hidden in the language. By the way, the gospel writers were aware of Plato, and they weren't living after the books of Plato had been destroyed, like Augustine was living in a time when they were destroyed. They still were preserved in parts of the world, but not in Rome. So that's important. So there is Platonism in the Gospels, but it's like only those who have ears will hear it. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word, this is Platonism.
Yeah.
And other parts. And Paul was very educated. So it's there, whether you like the Bible or not. And some of this is inspiration. So some of it's education, some of it's just, it comes out because they've heard this stuff. Okay, I want to read another thing here. It's only 12:54, so I actually go fast. It feels like I'm spending hours for some reason every time I give a talk. But now I want to read this. I think it's important. I hope it's clear. I thought that last thing really was good. So this is further on in Confessions after the other. I think it's still not, I'm not sure. We'll find out. But it's this kind of thing that I just described. It's that ascent. Now, back to these metaphors. He's talking about an ascent. He's ascending through the layers. But notice there's no ascent in this. It doesn't matter about these directions when you get into the philosophy.
Yeah.
They're just metaphors.
Yeah.
We reify them or hypostatize them or imagine them as physical things, but they're not to the greater understanding. So this is the sad thing where atheists ridicule the spiritual, seeing themselves as superior. And the sad thing is that they are intellectually superior to the people that are in the room.
Yeah.
They're trying to defend the Bible. And yet they're not superior to Augustine. They're not superior to the saints. Okay? And the genuine Christian mystics, and the same would be in any religion, they're always picking on the little guy. It's really sad because these guys can do circles around those people's minds. Okay, now, so this is that ascent, but it's really a going inside. It's going within. And that's why I said, see, they struggle. Okay, I'll get to that after this. I hope I remember about these metaphors. And I marveled, Augustine goes on later, chapter 17, number 23. And I marveled that I now love thee, and no phantasm in thy stead. And yet I was not stable enough to enjoy my God steadily. Instead, I was transported, because he's had like a vision, like just for a moment. Instead, I was transported to thee by the beauty, and then presently torn away from thee by my own weight, sinking with grief into those lower things. And look at the word lower. It's a space word, but it's just metaphor. Lower.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like less pure, less perfect, more corruptible, less permanent. This less real. See, in Plato, you have degrees of reality. So it's lower in degrees of reality, not under something. Okay. Into these lower things. This weight was carnal habit. Carnal means your physical body. But thy memory, like hunger, lust, they're physical. They're literally hormones. But thy memory dwelt with me, and I never doubted in the least that there was one, and that's capital O, one for me to cleave to. But I was not yet ready to cleave to thee firmly. For the body which is corrupted presses down the soul, and the earthly dwelling weighs down the mind, which muses upon many things. My greatest certainty was that the invisible things of thine from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even thy eternal power and Godhood. That's Platonic. Things that are circular are made in terms of ideas of the mind of God, like circularity. It's kind of complicated, which are permanent. For when I inquired how it was that I could appreciate the beauty of bodies, both celestial and terrestrial, and what it was what it was that supported me in making correct judgments about things mutable, and when I concluded this ought to be thus, this ought not, meaning he's making judgments about things, then when I inquired how it was that I could make such judgments, since I did in fact make them, I realized that I had found the unchangeable and true eternity of truth above my changeable mind. So this is like I was saying about, well, this is good, oh, this is not good. Oh, wait, this is good. What's this? So this is sort of the idea. There's some incorruptible thing that you have that can make those judgments, that allows you to make those judgments. That's where the reality, the direction of the reality. And thus by degrees, I was led upward from bodies to the soul, which perceives objects by means of the bodily senses, and from there on to the soul's inward faculty, to which the bodily senses report outward things. So he's up and he's going in, all these metaphors, but it's backing up into yourself. It's the amazing thing, because God is your real self back there looking for itself. To which the bodily senses report outward things, and this belongs even to the capacities of the beasts, and hence on up to the receiving power. By the way, what he just said is that, the ability to perceive outer objects, animals can do that. So it can't be a very great thing. So he's going further. And thence on up to the reasoning power, something animals can't do. Geometry is always given as the sort of the paragon example of reasoning, to whose judgment is referred an experience received from the bodily sense. And when this power of reason within me also found that it was changeable, it raised itself up to its own intellectual principle and withdrew its thoughts from experience. Withdrew, abstracting itself from the contradictory throng of phantasms in order to seek for that light in which it was bathed. Then, without any doubting, it cried out that the unchangeable was better than the changeable. From this it follows that the mind somehow knew the unchangeable, for unless it had known it in some fashion, it could have had no sure ground for preferring it to the changeable. And thus with the flash of a trembling glance, it arrived at that which is. And I saw thy indivisibility understood by means of the things that are made. It's a little difficult. But I was not able to sustain my gaze. My weakness was dashed back, and I lapsed again into my accustomed ways, carrying along with me nothing but a loving memory of my vision and an appetite for what I had, as it were, smelled the odor of, but was not yet able to eat.
Wow.
So, now we go, well, Baba is the second favorite saint. He's pointing to the philosophy of Augustine because it's the real understanding of his own teaching, which can be understood in terms of things like in space and everything. But anyway, you grow to love, this is the most difficult stuff in the Confessions. The Confessions is also a book that's just fun to read, but this is the tough stuff. This is where he's into the fun. So that's all the reading I'm gonna do. But what I wanna say is that what are all these metaphors for? And I think I've already said this. What are all these metaphors for? So in my talks,
Mhm.
I have these eyes, and that reality is further back, okay? Or before, or prior to, and it's God that sees through the well, it doesn't matter right now. And then, but it's a metaphor, that's my point. And then, it's a metaphor, this is out, this is behind or preceding, this is in or center, and this is above, and this is going inside myself, and none of it is true. None of it is, anybody who, there are people who literally kind of think that they're focused on their body and their food they eat, and their chakras and their chiropractor and their, that they're getting to the reality. That so they literally think that they're gonna arrive here or here, and then they're gonna arrive. It's as foolish as this. It's as foolish. They're all foolish, and yet none of them are foolish, because they're all seeking the same thing. And now, the way I would describe what all these metaphors are seeking, of course, this is a pitch, and I'll end after this. This is a pitch for my own book that I'm writing, which is that I offer my own metaphor, this one, and I explain why. These are all physical metaphors. They all have to do with location and direction, okay? They're all metaphors in terms of objects. So they're metaphors, much like Augustine said, he had no other way to think than in terms of the things that he perceived with his eyes. So this was his trap. But in our time, we can think about perception, and we can think about ways of perceiving things, and that because we may not be aware of it, but we're full of it, okay? We have Gestalt psychology. We all have been shown charts where you don't see something, and then finally somebody's trying to point it out, and suddenly you see it in the picture, and you go, oh, okay, so you see something changed in yourself, in your perception, that changed the object. But the object didn't really go anywhere or change. Now that is a psychological shift. Now what I believe is that everything that Meher Baba ever described was a way of perceiving. That what a must state is a way of perceiving. And what a human gross person is a way of perceiving things as physical. And that even God is really the state of experiencing reality, or just becoming reality. And so the metaphor of God here is the witness, the perceiver, who is himself his own object too. But I'm going to read a quote by Baba, and I want to point to this, and I want to say, make the case that this could not have been conceived prior to like 1926 to 1955 when Baba was writing, because they didn't have the idea of process. So, because in my book I have an evolution of ways of seeing, okay? And they don't even have the concept of perceiving. They just don't. It's not in the old literature. They don't have the word consciousness. They don't have any psychological terms. We have words like project. You're projecting that onto that. That's not really there. Or it's transference. You're getting mad. I'm getting mad at Ostert, but I'm really mad at my mom. So we see all these perceptual. We see perception as a causal power. And they could not have, even in the 19th century, it would have been impossible. Except for a few Gestalt psychologists in Germany or something like that. Very rare, but certainly not people like us. We wouldn't have even heard of these things. We didn't know. So now I want to do that. I want to read something, and I want to show. I don't need to do that. Okay. So, in the infinite intelligence, on the first page, there's a paragraph. It's really got the whole book in it. This is Baba's book, Infinite Intelligence. That paragraph is very dense, very hard to read, but it's really got everything in it that he's going to convey in the book. But and under it is a chart. And here. Now, each of these, the infinite intelligence at the top of the thing is in, he says in, he's using the space word here, in. But this is the important thing. This is what I want to get at, the meaning of the word in. Is in Ramju, it's in Deshmukh, it's in all of them. The infinite intelligence is in them thinking falsely, okay? Anyway, I want to go back quickly because the word in is a word that causes a lot of problems. Because when we say God is within me, what do I mean? Okay? Baba says that, starts God Speaks by saying that God is within each Atma. And then he said, now we're going to go beyond that and say that God is each Atma.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very related. But I didn't prepare well enough to get this across. It's kind of a big idea, and it's just, I'll have more parts to this in the future. But let's say I lay down on a couch and I have a dream. So I say that dream is in me. But what else could I say about the dream? Where else could the dream possibly be? And yet the dream can't possibly be physically in me because a dream is not a physical thing. Your brain is a physical thing, but a dream is not a physical thing. That's, after all, it's just a dream. You're dreaming of a ship. There's not a ship in you. There's just, but we still say it's in you. And what we just mean is it's not something outside of me. It's not something independent of me. It's not something separate. So it does have a sense of identity. So like I have it within me the capacity to really love or to be bad. I have the capacity to kill. It's in me, Well, what do I mean? What I mean is like it's part of me. It's not all of me, but it's part of me. And I just wanted to read this quote by Plotinus, because Plotinus is trying to convey, because he doesn't have psychology words like it. And I'm struggling with the words that I have. But imagining Plotinus in the 3rd century trying to explain what he doesn't mean by in, and what he does, it's just impossible. This is what I think, and it's just my theory. But I'm going to read what he said. He said, the intelligence is identical with these beings and contains them all, not locally, they're not located there. Not locally, same root, local. Not locally, but containing itself and being with its content, as the genus contains all species, or the whole contains all the parts. He's not able to convey what he means by in, and he doesn't mean in. And this is really important. So, because when we get to the first paragraph, and I'll end after this, I know this is coming. This is the first paragraph, and I'm going to just read this paragraph while pointing to my chart. Because my chart is trying to convey the same thing in psychological rather than physical terms. I wanted to show this again because this is the chart on the first page that actually goes with the writing I'm going to be reading. And if we turn it on its side, and we have these various mandali here, there they are, okay? Each one of them contains the whole and they are in it. Okay, they're all one. Okay, so now I'm going to read it. You'll hopefully see this. Okay. So now this is an I. It represents the infinite intelligence that is the sole witness. Before there was a world, this I, you could say, hadn't opened. Okay, and Baba gives that analogy. So we're going to use a perceptual analogy, not a physical analogy of, in a cave or up in the sky. All right, the infinite intelligence through the individual infinite mind, infinite false thinking, infinite false I, through the subtle body, realizes, thinks the infinite subtle imagination, or subtle universe, and through the infinite mind's gross body realizes, takes experience of, I'm just not going to repeat it, but he has sort of two. Through these bodies, experiences the infinite gross imagination, gross universe. The innumerable infinite false minds are in the one universal infinite false mind. Well, actually, I don't know, maybe this is the infinite false mind. False I, false egoism, and this infinite false thinking mind is in the infinite intelligence. So the infinite intelligence is in every individual infinite false mind. Through every individual infinite false mind and its subtle and gross bodies, it is the same one infinite intelligence realizing its subtle and gross imagination. So through each one of these, it's the same, let me repeat that. It's the same one infinite intelligence realizing its subtle and gross imagination. So there's only one person here. There's only one seer.
You want to call it person?
Well, some people.
You can call it person.
No, what I like to say is that
one.
there's not one God, there's only God. There's
Yeah, right.
And in Christianity, they say God is a person, and they mean separate from yourself. And they absolutely, emphatically, that's an emphatic part of Christian doctrine. We're not talking about you. It's a person that's not you. That's why even Augustine only gets as close as looking and seeing God. Of course, he's probably, in Baba's explanation, he's on the sixth plane, so he never experiences himself as the ultimate seer. He never realizes he is the one.
Yeah.
Okay? Because he's on the probably sixth plane. Anyway, I hope that was just generally gotten across, like the general gist, because I wasn't ready to with the subtle and the gross. I just sort of have the gross. So skipping that, it's easier. Through the infinite mind's gross body. Anyway, you get it. It's too hard. That is my point. And I said it, and these are hard things to verbalize. Let's see that. I don't think I even have any more. No. We can see all the. This is a beautiful. I love this. I love this because it's in Confessions. At the end of Confessions, he finishes his story. It's his life, and then he has a section. He suddenly stops telling a story, and nobody quite gets what was going through his head. He just starts writing things that's like stream of consciousness, just whatever goes. And this line is in there, and it's very close. It's like this page before the last page. It's just one of those like gems, and it says exactly what I just said. It said, "We can see all those things which thou hast made because they are." So we, but they are because thou seest them. And that brings a full circle back to Augustine, that I think that this is what every saint sees, and no one's been able to articulate. And I think that even Meher Baba tortured over trying to articulate it too, and getting the Sufis and people to try to edit his book, God Speaks, and he never seemed satisfied.
Because you can't.
You can't, yeah. It's kind of ineffable beyond the power of words. But the key, I think, is psychology. And that the future of science, in a way, not science for just making things that work, but the science of the universe is actually a form of sort of like psychology, like physical psychology, like the psychology of physics. Because I say in my book that these are the laws of nature that hold the world together. And that's why we see those here, because we're perceiving them, we're projecting them essentially. These are like lenses. It's like you look through a pink lens and everything's pink. You look through a blue lens and everything's blue. So you look through a lens that makes all things that are dropped fall at 30 feet per second per second. All the things that you perceive falling are falling at 30 feet per second, because it's actually producing the law that's governing perception. And I say the laws of nature are really laws of perception, mischaracterized.
Or this sentence, but that's not, unless I have the book, I couldn't.
No, you couldn't get, I'm just telling.
On your video, of course.
No, the point is, my book isn't even done. My book will come out, and then later, when I'm dead, people can look at this, and then I was talking about what I was trying to convey, if I fail to in my book. So, thank you for coming.
Well, it sure stretched my mind, because I'm not a natural philosopher, but.
Right. No, it's philosophy, nothing harder, and in a way, nothing is more painful. Because it kind of like hurts. It's like putting your arm back here. Yeah. And
we thank you for appearing.
Thank you for coming. I really do. I appreciate it.
I mean, you're even taking notes. Are you going home
No, I
now?
think he was writing a letter to his wife.
Oh.
He knows nothing.
I know. Of course I don't know anything.
He's going home and he's going.
I'm going to other brother.
Going inside. Going in.
Yes. Okay.